Forgiving student loan doesn't solve the crisis. Here's what would. First things first, never let it happen again, writes my next guest, Neetu Arnold, who's joining us on camera right now. Her latest article just appeared in The Spectator. She's joining us to talk about the student loan crisis. Good morning, Neetu. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you here. So, explain to us your thesis. Why would you, as a young person, not be in favor of student loans? It's free stuff, right?
Yeah, it's free. It's never really free. Somebody is always paying for this. And this is a large wealth transfer from people who do not receive the benefits from a college degree to people who do. And again, there's a lot of individual choices that come into play here when it comes to choosing which college you go to. And that really shouldn't be left up to the taxpayer. I would also say that debt forgiveness doesn't address the root problem of why college has become so expensive. It's also not going to address this problem we're going to have to deal with again in potentially 6 years, around 2028. That's when it's estimated that we will return to the current $1.6 trillion of outstanding student loan debt that we have. So this is not addressing the root problem. And it's also, again, it's unfair.
Al, you were saying during the commercial break that your wife is really livid about this. She's not happy about this whole thing.
Well, because it's inequitable. Number one, she knew what she was getting into. She volunteered willingly got the loans. When she did get the loans, she knew that she was responsible for paying them back. And she did pay them back. And she got her college education. The loans have been paid back, and she's happy.
Yeah,
But she doesn't like the idea of paying, taking this time frame, and paying off student debt. And I agree with Neetu that it's very inequitable.
I mean, Neetu, I think a lot of people are justifiably outraged over this. Don't you
Yes.
agree?
Absolutely. Again, it's not addressing the problem. I think what frustrates a lot of people on this particular issue is that we're talking about public funds here, and we're not seeing it put to good use. The federal student loan system is going there aren't any checks in place. There aren't checks or balances in place. So there isn't a way to tell whether a student has the ability to repay their loans or finish their programs. And so for a lot of this is just handing out loans without any expected return, and the taxpayer is expected to remain on the hook. And so one idea I have to fix this issue, it's very simple. It's to condition federal student loan lending to things like the return on investment of a degree or the academic preparation of a student, such as those that we see through test scores. I want to emphasize conditioning federal loans on academic preparation specifically, because a lot of the issues we see with the student debt crisis is we have a lot of people that are going to college who may not be academically prepared, and then some of them will drop out, so they are getting all the debt but none of the benefits of the degree. We also see people who may enter college, they enter a degree with a high return on investment, but then college becomes difficult and they switch to an easier major, which may have a lower return on investment. So again, in the end, they took out federal student loans, but when they graduate, the economic returns are not there. And I think that's the issue here.
Neetu, can you talk to us about what policymakers doing? Have any politicians actually proposed any legislation that might prevent something like this from happening going forward?
Yeah, so the Real Reforms Act was proposed by lawmakers against President Biden's proposal of targeted debt forgiveness. One specific provision that I like in this bill is that it would curb executive authority to forgive these kind of debts again. And I think that's what we need, because the way this decision was made was it's questionable. We don't know the constitutionality of this. I mean, there's a lawsuit right now that's questioning whether the Biden administration could use their executive authority rather than leaving this decision up to Congress. And again, as I said earlier, we're going to have to deal with this issue again. If we don't curb executive authority at some point, it may not happen in the next couple of months, and we need to wait for the results from the midterm elections. But if we don't address this soon, then the doors have been opened for more debt forgiveness. And so again, this could happen again.
You can text the show this morning at 573-319-1586. We're speaking to Neetu Arnold about her article in The Spectator. Hal Dooley is still joining me in studio. Hal, I thought it was interesting, the president, he said that the coronavirus pandemic was over, and yet he doesn't want to give up his emergency powers and authorizations for
You
things
can't
like
have
this.
it both ways.
Yeah,
You
he
can't have it
he
both
can,
ways.
right? It's the power of the imperial presidency.
And Neetu brought up a very interesting point, very valid point, on the constitutionality of some of these executive orders. And they need to be curtailed or challenged to make sure specifically that they aren't abused. And personally, I think they're being abused right now, or at least stretched way beyond what the original intent was.
What do you think federal student loans should be based on in terms of the criteria for how we should determine who gets a federal student loan? Need to?
Yeah, so I think first it should be based on a student's academic preparation, just so that we don't have loans going to people who we could reasonably could expect they wouldn't do well in school. But the second thing would be the return on investment, the potential earnings over the course of several years. I think when it comes to federal funding, it should go to people where we would see great benefit. That's the point of public funds. We should see public benefits. And an example would be right now we have a shortage in domestic STEM workers, people working in science, technology, engineering, and math. We could see great investment if federal loans just went to those students, for example. I mean, those degrees have high return on investment. We would benefit from more workers in those fields. And so to me, that seems like a win-win situation. That's how public funds should work. It shouldn't be going to psychology majors who don't even end up working in psychology because either due to underemployment or because the field is too saturated.
Now, I could see the outrage from the left on making that kind of proposal.
Yeah.
That almost sounds like the kind of determinations that would be made if you were a moneylender in the private market and you were making a decision based on the ability of the person to repay a loan. It sounds almost like a free market style solution.
That'd be terrible if we did something like that, wouldn't it?
I don't know about that need to. You're starting to try and apply free market principles to government thinkers, and
Oh no, the horror.
the horror, the horror, the horror. If you're just tuning in to the Wake Up America show with Austin Petersen, we're speaking to Neetu Arnold about student loan debt forgiveness. You can text the show at 573-319-1586. Neetu, is there anything else of importance on this topic that you think that our listeners should know about it?
I mean, I really wanted to get the point across that we really need to condition federal student loans to outcomes, to the kind of preparation students receive. But I also think people should be keeping an eye out on the current lawsuit that's been filed by the Pacific Legal Foundation. That's going to be in the news. There's probably going to be more lawsuits happening. Now, my view on that, I think there are two things that this particular lawsuit is trying to address. There's one where they want to address the injury aspect. So by participating in the debt forgiveness program, are there more harms created? Which in this particular lawsuit, I'm not sure about that. I think that's going to be a very difficult case to make. But then there's a second aspect, which is the constitutionality. No president has ever used their executive authority to forgive student debt. We have used it to delay payments, and there's a big difference between delaying repayments because of a national emergency or war, where maybe a soldier their first priority may not be paying off their student loan debt because they're fighting in a war. But there's a big difference between that and just outright forgiving student loan debt, and the potential precedents it could set if nothing is done about it right now.
That's Neetu Arnold, whose article in The Spectator you can read, and it's titled Forgiving Student Loans